Claire had been specific about that. Specific in the way she was specific about most things that mattered to her, which was precisely and without apology. She said flowers at graves were for the living pretending to help the dead, and she had never been interested in performance for its own sake. She was an art teacher at Millbrook Middle School who could identify the exact moment a 12-year-old stopped performing creativity and started actually making something, and she applied that same quality of attention to everything, including the instructions she left behind for the people who loved her. No flowers. Just come. Just stand there for a while and tell me about your week. So that was what I did. Every Sunday for a year. I drove 40 minutes from my apartment in Raleigh to the cemetery in Cary where she was buried under a flat granite marker with her name and the years and a single line she had chosen herself. She looked at things carefully. I stood in front of that stone in whatever the weather was doing and told her about the week, the restoration project I was managing on a 1908 Methodist church in downtown Fayetteville. The way the October light came through the south windows of my apartment at an angle she would have painted. The coffee from the place on Glenwood she had never tried because it opened 4 months after she died, and I kept going because it felt, irrationally and specifically, like taking her somewhere new. I told her about the guilt too. I had gotten good at saying it out loud to the granite because I couldn't say it anywhere else. The fact that I was standing on the roof of a cotton warehouse in Savannah, examining water-damaged copper gutters when her condition changed. The fact that I had been 2 hours into the drive back when her sister called and said it had happened fast, that she had been comfortable, that she hadn't been alone. The fact that I had pulled over at a rest stop on I-95 in South Carolina and sat in a parking space for 40 minutes, unable to make myself move toward a world that no longer had Claire in it. She died on a Tuesday in November. She was 32 years old. I am James Aldrin. I was 34 when she died, and am 35 now, a restoration architect who spends his professional life deciding what can be saved and what has to come down before anything new can be built. The irony of this was not lost on me during the year I spent not building anything new. I was very good at recognizing structural integrity in a 100-year-old building. I had no language at all for the state of my own. The Sunday she appeared was the 52nd one. Exactly a year. I had not planned to mark the anniversary specifically. I was not a man who did well with marked occasions, which was something Claire had tolerated with the fond patience of a woman who was better at living in time than I was. But I knew it was the 52nd Sunday, the way you know things you haven't consciously counted, but your body has been counting for you. I was standing in my usual position, hands in my coat pockets, looking at the stone, when I became aware that someone was standing a few feet to my left. Not at a neighboring grave. At Claire's grave. Facing the same marker I was facing. She was roughly my age, maybe a year or two younger. Brown hair, loosened down, moving slightly in the November wind. A dark green canvas jacket, paint stained at the left cuff. She was holding nothing. She was looking at the stone with the particular expression of a person who has said what they came to say and is now just being present in the aftermath. I said nothing. People were entitled to their silence at graves. I didn't know who she was or what connection she had to this particular marker, and it wasn't mine to ask. Then she said, without looking at me, "You're James." I turned. She was already looking at me. Dark eyes, steady, the expression of someone who has been rehearsing the beginning of a sentence and has decided to stop rehearsing and say it. "She asked me to find you," she said. "I've been trying to figure out the right Sunday for a year." The wind moved through the cemetery. Somewhere behind me a groundskeeper's equipment hummed and stopped. "Who are you?" I said. "Nora Vance." She held my gaze. I was Claire's art therapist. At Piedmont Cancer Center. The last 3 months. I had known Claire did the art therapy sessions. She had mentioned them on phone calls, lightly. The way she mentioned things she was protecting me from worrying about, quickly with a quality of reassurance embedded in the phrasing. "There's this art therapy thing on Thursdays. It's actually good. I made something you'd find embarrassing on my behalf." I had been in Savannah more than I was home in those last months. I had been making up for it on the Sundays I wasn't in this cemetery. She talked about you, Nora said. In the sessions. A significant amount. A pause. She gave me something to give you, and she asked me to tell you something specific. She was very clear about both the what and the when. She said to wait a year. She said you'd need the year. Something moved in her expression. Not pity. Something more precise than that. I've been coming on Sundays for the last month trying to time it right. I looked at Claire's stone, then back at this woman who was standing in the November air with paint on her jacket cuff and the specific composure of someone carrying a responsibility that has gotten heavier the longer they've held it. Okay, I said. I have the paintings in my car, she said. If you want them today. Paintings, she painted during the sessions. Small watercolors, mostly. She did 12 of them in the 3 months before she died. She called them the inventory. Nora paused. She was very specific about what they were for. She said they were for you to keep, not to carry. She held my gaze. She was also specific about the difference. I stood in front of my wife's grave in the year following her death and felt the specific sensation of a man who thought he understood the shape of his own grief and has just discovered it has a room he hadn't found yet. She knew about the Savannah thing, I said. It wasn't a question. If Claire had talked about me in the sessions, she had talked about the things that mattered. The things that mattered included the fact that I wasn't there. Nora was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. She knew. What did she say about it? She said to tell you that she knew you were coming. Her voice was level and careful. She said she wasn't alone. And she said, a brief pause. She said, he'll have been carrying the wrong version of that day for a year. Tell him to put it down. I could not speak for a long moment. The groundskeeper's equipment started again somewhere. A crow landed on a grave 3 rows down and reconsidered. She sounds like herself, I said finally. She was entirely herself, Nora said quietly, right to the end. That was not a small thing. A lot of people stop being themselves when they're frightened. Claire never did. I looked at the stone. She looked at things carefully. I'll take the paintings, I said. We walked to the parking lot, which felt strange, the ordinary logistics of a parking lot after the weight of what had just happened at the grave. Nora drove a 10-year-old Subaru with a back seat that held a flat wooden carrier designed to transport artwork without damage. She lifted the carrier out with the practiced ease of someone who moved art regularly and set it on the tailgate. Inside were 12 small watercolors, each mounted on board, each wrapped in glassine paper with a number written in Claire's handwriting in the upper right corner. 1 through 12. I looked at the top one. Number 1, through the glassine without unwrapping it. Even through the paper I could see the colors. Warm yellows and deep blues. The shape of a room I recognized. That's our kitchen, I said. Yes, I looked at Nora. Did she tell you what they each were? She told me some of them. She folded her arms against the cold. She didn't over-explain. She said you'd know. I stood in the parking lot of the cemetery with 12 of my wife's paintings in a wooden carrier and the November light going flat around us. And I thought about Claire at a table in a cancer center art therapy room, making an inventory of our life together in watercolor, calling it exactly what it was. She had always called things exactly what they were. I had always admired it and occasionally found it devastating, sometimes within the same sentence. She said you'd want to look at them alone first, Nora said. She said to tell you that was fine, and that she put them in order on purpose, and that you should follow the order. She was very prepared, I said. She had 3 months. Nora's voice wasn't sharp when she said it, just honest. She used them. I looked at the carrier. Can I ask you something? Yes, why did she ask you to do this? She had a sister. Friends. I paused. Why the art therapist? Nora considered this in the careful way that told me she had considered it before, probably many times. She said she needed someone who didn't love her, she said. Not in a sad way. Practically, she said the people who loved her would either keep the paintings because they couldn't let them go, or give them to you too soon because they needed to. She needed someone who could hold them for exactly the right amount of time and then give them up cleanly. A pause. She also said I was the only person she'd told the full story to, which meant I was the only person who could deliver it correctly. I looked at the stone in the distance. What was the full story? Nora met my eyes. That's going to take more than a parking lot. I drove home with the paintings on my back seat and did not look at them for 3 days. Not because I was afraid of them, because Claire had said to follow the order, and I knew myself well enough to know that I needed to be ready to follow it completely, rather than picking through it the way you pick through a difficult project, looking for the easy parts first. On Wednesday evening, I cleared the kitchen table, which was the table from painting number 1, the one I had recognized through the glassine, and I opened them in order. Number 1 was our kitchen on a Sunday morning. Yellow light through the east window, 2 coffee cups on the counter, one slightly behind the other. My reading glasses folded on the edge of the table. The scene was ordinary in the specific way that the things we live in every day become invisible. You stop seeing them because they're always there. And then they're not, and the not there-ness is everything. Number 2 was a stretch of road I recognized as the drive between Raleigh and the coast, the one we took every August to the same rental house on the Outer Banks. The painting showed the moment the highway crossed over the first bridge and the water appeared on both sides, the precise geographic beat where you understood you had arrived somewhere different. Number 3 was the church in Fayetteville, my restoration project. She had never visited the site. I had been describing it on phone calls, sending photographs, and yet she had painted it with the accuracy of someone who had looked at my photographs so carefully she could reconstruct the building from memory. The south transept with its water, damaged limestone. The original bell tower with the replaced windows that had always bothered me. She had painted it in winter light, a little cold, a little gray, but with a quality of attention in the brushwork that said, I knew this mattered to you, so I looked at it carefully. I sat at the kitchen table and could not continue past number 3, not because the paintings were painful. They were. But that wasn't it. It was that they were precise. Claire had made an inventory of the things that were us, had looked at them with the same care she applied to a 12-year-old's first real attempt at drawing, and had turned them into the kind of record that didn't require words. I was looking at my own life through her eyes, and what she saw in it was not what I had been seeing in the year since she died. She had not painted the hospital. She had not painted anything that was ending. She had painted the things that were present and alive, the things that were so ordinary I had stopped noticing them. And in every painting there was light doing something specific, landing at an angle that said, look at this, just look at this. It was here. I called Nora on Thursday. I had her number from the card she had slipped into the carrier with the paintings, written by hand, a Raleigh area code. She picked up on the second ring. The church, I said. She painted the church. She had never been there. A pause then. She told me about it for 3 weeks in the sessions before she painted it. She said you described it every Thursday on the phone, and she could hear by the way you described it that it was the kind of work that made you feel like what you did mattered. A quiet pause. She painted what she heard. I looked at number 3 on the kitchen table. The bell tower. The limestone. She was paying attention, I said. She was always paying attention, Nora said. She just usually let people think she wasn't. She said it was more useful that way. That was so precisely Claire that I made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite not. Are you okay? Nora said. I don't know, I said. I got through 3. Take your time. She factored in the time. She factored in everything, I said. She tried, Nora said. She couldn't factor in everything. She said she was sorry about that. I set down the phone for a moment, then picked it back up. She said that? In the last session. She said, tell James I'm sorry I couldn't plan around being gone. I could plan everything else. I sat with that in the Thursday quiet of the kitchen and thought about the quality of love that spends its final months building forward for the people it's leaving, instead of spending what's left of itself on its own fear. She was better at this than anyone I've ever known, I said. Yes. Nora said simply. She was. There was a pause between us that was not uncomfortable. It had the texture of two people sitting with the same true thing from slightly different positions. Can I ask something? I said. You can ask whatever you want. Does this get heavy? The art therapy. Being with people in that state. Nora was quiet for a moment. It gets heavy differently than you'd expect, she said. It's not the death that's heavy. It's the privilege, being trusted with what people make when they're not managing their image anymore, when they're just making. That weight is real, but it's not a bad weight. A pause. The grief is its own thing. That I take home. I just try to be honest about when I need to put it somewhere. You've been holding Claire's paintings for a year, I said. I have. That's a long time to hold something that isn't yours. She asked me to, Nora said. I don't know how to not follow through on something someone asked me to from that position. I thought about the paint stain on her jacket cuff, about the Subaru with the art carrier in the back seat, about a woman who drove to a cemetery every Sunday for a month trying to time the thing right, because she had promised she would time it right. Thank you, I said, for following through. A pause. You're welcome, she said. And the way she said it told me it cost her something to receive it cleanly, which was its own kind of information. My colleague at the firm, a structural engineer named Petra, who had worked with me for 6 years and communicated in the architectural equivalent of blunt force trauma, appeared in my office doorway on a Friday morning with 2 coffees and an expression that said she was going to say something I hadn't asked for. She set 1 coffee on my desk, sat down without being invited, looked at the paintings I had leaned against the wall when I brought them in to look at during lunch. I had gotten through all 12 by then. I had looked at each one until I understood it. I had cried twice, which was twice more than I had managed in the previous 12 months. These are hers, Petra said. Yes, they're extraordinary. She was. I turned back to my screen, which she correctly identified as not a dismissal but a boundary. You look different this week, she said. Different how? Less like a building waiting to be condemned. She picked up her coffee, more like one someone just decided is worth the restoration budget. She stood. Whoever showed up at the cemetery was good for you. I don't know who they were and you don't have to tell me. Her art therapist, I said. Petra looked at the paintings again. At number 3 specifically, the church. Claire hired her own art therapist to go find you a year later with the work she made. A pause. That is either the most romantic or the most structurally sound thing I've ever heard. It's both, I said. She covered multiple categories. Sunday came around again. I drove to the cemetery out of habit that had become something more than habit, the way things that start as ritual become eventually just true. I stood at Claire's grave in the early December cold and told her about the paintings, told her I had followed the order, told her I understood what she meant about keeping versus carrying, though I was still working on the carrying part, which she probably knew. I told her about Nora. Saying it out loud to Claire felt important. Not as permission. I didn't think I needed permission, and I didn't think Claire would have framed it that way. She had never been interested in arrangements that required anyone to make themselves smaller. But it felt like honesty, and honesty with Claire had always been the standard even when it was uncomfortable, and I was not going to lower that standard now. She's careful, I said. Not closed. Careful. There's a difference, and I think you knew that about her before I did. I looked at the stone. You picked her well. Not just for the paintings. The wind came through. The cemetery was quiet except for it. I know what you were doing, I said. I know you were building something forward. I'm going to try to be worth what you built. On the way back to my car, I passed Nora in the parking lot. She was arriving. We almost didn't see each other until we were 10 feet apart. She stopped. I stopped. Sunday, she said, slightly startled. Always Sunday, I said. She was wearing the green jacket again, same paint stain. She had a small notebook in her hand. Not for Claire, I understood. She came for herself. She had been coming for herself. Do you want company? I said. Or is this yours? She thought about it with the directness I was learning was simply how she processed things. It can be both, she said. We walked back to the grave together. She stood at my left again, the same position as the week before. The stone said what it always said. After a while, she said, "She told me you restore buildings. I try to save the ones people have given up on," I said. Determine what's original, what's been added incorrectly, what the building actually was before it started becoming something else. What happens when you can't save it? Sometimes you can only document it. Record what it was before it's gone. So the information isn't lost even if the building is. I paused. Claire used to say that was the saddest version of my job. What did you say? I said at least it gets to be seen clearly before the end. I looked at the grave. She said I was describing her job as a teacher. Nora smiled. Not large. She didn't do large expressions carelessly. Small and real and turned slightly down, the kind of smile that came from somewhere genuine rather than somewhere performed. She talked about her students a lot in the sessions, she said. The way you can see a child arrive at a real idea for the first time. She said it was the best thing she knew how to witness. She spent her whole career making things visible, I said. Things people had convinced themselves weren't there. She made you visible, Nora said, in the paintings. I looked at her. That's what the inventory was. She painted the things you had been too close to see for yourself. The coffee cups, the road to the coast, the church. She met my gaze. She knew you'd stop seeing the life you were living because you were too busy trying to hold it together. She painted it so you could see it from the right distance. The December air was cold and honest. She sent you because you do the same thing, I said, for the people you work with. Make things visible. Nora looked at Claire's stone. I like to think so. Some days more than others. A pause. I left Piedmont 3 months ago. I'm starting my own practice. Independent art therapy. Mostly grief work and palliative care. She said it the way people announce something they're still not certain was the right decision. With the conviction of someone who has made it, and the vulnerability of someone who doesn't yet know how it lands. That's substantial, I said. It's terrifying, she said. I have 4 clients. I had a caseload of 30 at the hospital. She looked down. Claire would tell me I was building something that didn't exist yet, instead of maintaining something that already did, and that the first thing was harder and more important. She'd be right, I said. She usually was. A beat. I'm reciting her advice to myself a lot right now, which is either a tribute or a crutch, and I haven't decided which. Can it be both? She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her yet. Something lighter. You sound like her now. I spent 7 years married to her. Some of it stuck. We stood at the grave until the cold became the kind that asks you to decide. Then we walked back toward the parking lot, not hurrying, the gravel path between sections of the cemetery, saying nothing in particular under our feet. Coffee? I said. Not to make anything of it, just coffee. Nora considered this in her careful way. The place on Glenwood? I looked at her. You know about the place on Glenwood. Claire told me you went because it felt like taking her somewhere new. She met my eyes steadily, without apology for knowing. She thought that was one of the most heartbreaking and correct things she'd ever heard. I stood in the cemetery parking lot in December and thought about a woman who was dying who had listened to the things her husband said about a coffee shop and found them heartbreaking and correct and repeated them too, her art therapist, because she wanted someone else in the world to know that this person she loved did things like that. She saw me clearly, I said. She did. Nora's voice was level. That's why she asked me to find you. She didn't want it to go to waste. The coffee place on Glenwood was called Still Water, and it had the specific quality of light that comes from east-facing windows in a building that was original to the 1940s block. The kind of light I noticed professionally, and Claire had noticed aesthetically, and we had rarely disagreed about. I told Nora this, and she looked at the light and then at me with an expression that said the information was going in a folder. She ordered a cortado. I ordered black drip, no exceptions. Tell me about the independent practice, I said. She wrapped her hands around her cup. I have a studio space off Hillsborough Street. Small, enough room for a table, a supply cart, good north light, and 2 chairs that aren't hospital chairs. She looked at her coffee. I spent 3 months finding chairs that didn't feel like waiting. That was probably excessive. No, I said. Chairs matter. I spent 2 weeks once choosing replacement timber for a courthouse floor because the wrong wood grain would have changed how the room sounded when people walked through it. I paused. Details are how buildings tell the truth about themselves. Your studio's details are telling you something. She looked at me with the particular attention of someone who processes through hearing. What are they telling me? That you want the people who come to you to feel like they're somewhere safe that was chosen deliberately. Not a hospital. Not temporary, somewhere that stays still while everything else moves. Nora was quiet for a moment. Then, that's exactly what I want. She said it like I had said something she had been trying to say herself and not found the right form for. I couldn't articulate it before you just said it. You built it before you had the language, I said. That's not a problem. That's usually how the good ones work. She looked at me for a moment. You're good at this. Seeing what something is trying to be. Occupational habit, I said. Every building I work on was trying to be something. My job is figuring out what that was and getting it back. What happens when the original intent was wrong? Then you figure out what the building was capable of being and go from there. I held her gaze. The original intent is a starting point, not a ceiling. Nora looked at her cortado. Is that true for people? I'm finding out, I said. She smiled again, the small real one. That's a diplomatic answer. I mean it literally. I'm finding out in real time. A year ago, I would have told you the original intent was the only thing that counted, that you preserved what was there or admitted it was lost. There was no third category. And now? I thought about number 4 in Claire's inventory. The painting I hadn't mentioned yet, not to Petra, not to anyone. Number 4 was a painting of the rest stop on I-95 in South Carolina, where I had sat for 40 minutes in a parking space the day Claire died. She had not been there. I had never described it to her specifically, but she had painted what it looked like. The highway light, the anonymous pavement, the sense of a man sitting very still inside something that had just changed completely, and in the painting, in the way she had handled the light coming through a painted windshield, there was no accusation. There was nothing that said you should have driven faster. There was only this: I see you, even here, even in the thing you're most ashamed of, and this is also part of the inventory. Now I think there might be a third category, I said, between what was there and what was lost. Nora held my gaze across the table. What's in the third category? What can be built from what was learned? I said. By the people who paid enough attention. The coffee shop moved around us. A Saturday crowd of Raleigh. Students, couples, a man in the corner working on something he was very serious about on a laptop, a small child explaining something urgent to a parent who was genuinely trying to follow. The kind of ordinary human texture Claire would have noticed and I had spent a year not seeing. I was starting to see it again. That had something to do with the paintings. It had something to do with standing at a grave in December telling it things. It had something to do with the woman across the table who knew my wife in the last months and had carried a wooden art carrier in the back of a Subaru for a year because she had been asked to and had no interest in breaking promises. Can I ask you something? Nora said. Yes. Why did you come back to the grave every Sunday for a year? I understand the first few. But every week. For a year. That's more than grief. What were you going there for? The question was direct in the way Nora was direct, not aggressive, just clear. She asked things like she expected honest answers and didn't have time for the versions that weren't. I thought about it. She was the person I told things to, I said. When something happened, my first instinct was always to tell Claire. She was the first audience for everything, not because I needed her reaction, just because the thing wasn't fully real until I'd said it to her. I looked at my coffee. When she was gone, the things kept happening, the small ones especially. The coffee shop opening, the angle of October light, a 12-year-old at the church who asked me why anyone would spend time saving a building that was already broken. I paused. I kept needing to tell her. So I went on Sundays and I told her. Nora looked at me for a long moment. What did the 12-year-old say when you answered? I looked up, surprised she'd gone there. I told him that broken wasn't the same as done, that the difference between a building worth saving and one that wasn't was usually whether it still had what it was made of inside, under everything that had happened to it. What did he say? He thought about it for a minute, and then asked if I meant like a person. I shook my head slightly. 12-year-olds are devastating. They are, Nora agreed. Claire loved them for exactly that reason. She held her cup. She told me about her students the way you describe buildings. Like each one was a structure she was trying to understand from the inside. I thought about the 7th painting in the inventory. A classroom. Small desks at angles, afternoon light through institutional blinds, a painting on a bulletin board that must have been a student's, not Claire's style, rougher, more urgent. She had painted a child's art in her own art. The thought undid me again, quietly and without warning the way things did now. Number 7, I said. Nora looked at me. She knew what I meant. The classroom, I said. She painted someone else's work inside her own. She told me about that one, Nora said. She said a girl named Amara had made a painting of her dog the week before Claire got her diagnosis. She kept a photo of it on her phone. She said she wanted to put it in the inventory because it was the last thing she looked at that didn't know yet. I sat with that. The last thing she looked at that didn't know yet. She was paying attention to the last moment before everything changed, I said. She was, Nora said. She said you did the same thing with buildings. I photographed them before the restoration, I said. What they are, honestly, before we start deciding what they should be. So the before isn't lost even when the after is better. Nora set her coffee down and looked at me with an expression I was learning to read. The one that meant she was filing something. She said, Nora began carefully, that the thing she loved most about you was that you looked at things before they were finished and saw what they were trying to be. Not what they were failing to be, what they were reaching for. She paused. She said most people waited until something was done to see it. You looked at it in the process and named it. The Saturday morning noise of still water moved around us and I was not able to speak for a moment, which I didn't try to hide, because Nora had been present with people in their most unmanaged states, and I didn't think pretending would impress her. She overstated it, I said finally. She didn't, Nora said. She was precise. She didn't overstate things. A pause. She was also specific about this. She said she wasn't telling me, so I would tell you. She said it because she wanted someone other than her to know it was true, so it didn't disappear when she did. I looked at the east light in the windows of Stillwater. The 1940s glass, original to the building, slightly wavy in the old way that mass-produced glass wasn't, the imperfection that made the light come through in a way no replacement could reproduce. She was thinking about what disappears, I said. She was thinking about what stays, Nora said. That was the point of the inventory, not what she was losing, what was going to stay. We sat there past the point where coffee was the reason we were sitting. Neither of us proposed leaving. The Saturday crowd cycled through around us. The man with the laptop stayed. The small child and parent left and were replaced by 2 older women who appeared to be having a conversation of great significance about something neither of us could hear. You're building something right now, I said. The practice. The studio. The chairs you spent 3 months choosing. Trying to, she said. What does it need? She looked at me as if the question surprised her slightly. Not the fact of being asked, but the directness of it, someone asking what the building needed instead of what she was worried about. It needs people to find it, she said. I have the space. I have the work. I have the approach, which I believe in, which is the kind of art therapy that's not about making art that looks like anything, just about making something when you can't say the thing in words. She looked at her hands, the paint stain on the cuff. The connection to Piedmont was how people found me. Without that, I have to build the finding structure from scratch. What's the finding structure for a restoration project? I said. She tilted her head. Referrals, I said. People who've seen the work. One building tells the story that brings you the next one. You do one right and you do it honestly and the network builds itself. I paused. Hospice networks. Oncology social workers. Grief counselors who need somewhere to refer people who don't have language yet. Those are your referral architects. She was quiet for a long moment. I know all of this, she said. I know you know it, I said. Sometimes it's useful to hear it said directly by someone who isn't in it. She looked at me. Is that what you're doing? Being outside it? I'm just saying what I see, I said. Someone who built something deliberately, in the right light, with the right chairs, who knows what they're doing, and has the work to prove it. The structure is sound. It needs time to carry the load. You're describing me like a building. I describe everything I care about like a building, I said. Claire found it annoying and eventually fond. Nora smiled, the bigger version this time. Unguarded and brief, and then managed back to something smaller, like she'd offered more than she intended and decided she was okay with it. Did she tell you that? She said. She put it in a letter she wrote me in the hospital. 1 of 4. I've read 3. I looked at the table. I'm pacing myself. Good, she said simply. She paced things for a reason. Outside on Glenwood, the December Saturday went on being December. Cars moved. People walked with their collars up against it. A delivery truck idled outside the building across the street. A 1950s commercial block that had been badly renovated in the 1980s. And given back most of what it lost in a restoration project, someone did well about 5 years ago. I had walked past it 50 times. I looked at it now with the specific eye of a man who was, for the first time in a year, actually seeing what was in front of him. Can I show you something? I said. We stood on the sidewalk in front of the building across the street, and I told her what it was before, and what it had been made into, and what the restoration had recovered. The original brick that had been stuccoed over, and then revealed. The cast iron detailing at the cornice that had been painted 17 times, and stripped back to the original finish. The windows on the second floor, replacement sash but true to the original profile. The kind of decision that cost more, and mattered to nobody except people who cared about what the building was trying to be. Nora stood beside me on the sidewalk and looked at it with her particular quality of attention. You can tell the story of it just by looking, she said. If you know what to look for. What do you look for? The places where something was added that doesn't belong, I said. Material that wasn't original. Decisions made in a different era that were well-intentioned and wrong. And under all of that, the bones. What the building actually was before it started becoming something else. I paused. The bones are usually still good. That's the thing most people don't believe until you show them. Nora looked at the building, then at me. You've been showing yourself that for a year, she said quietly, standing at a grave. Telling Claire about the week, trying to find out whether the bones are still good. I looked at the building across the street, at the brick that had been buried under stucco and then found again. I think they are, I said. I think they are. Nora's shoulder was close to mine on the sidewalk. Neither of us moved apart. She was right about you, she said. She was usually right. She was right about this specifically. A pause. She said, James sees what things are trying to be. Find him when the year is up and show him what I made. He'll understand it in the way that counts. I looked at her. And after that, Nora met my eyes on the December sidewalk with the specific steadiness of a woman who had carried a promise for a year and delivered it cleanly and was now standing in the after, which she had not entirely planned for. After that, she said, was mine to figure out. And have you? She looked back at the building, at the brick that had been found again. I'm working on it, she said. The Sunday after that, I came to the cemetery and Nora was already there. She had arrived earlier than me and was standing at the grave with her hands in the pockets of the green jacket, looking at the stone with the expression of someone who has said what they came to say and is just being present in the aftermath. The same expression as the first Sunday. I stood beside her. The December air was very clear. I read the fourth letter, I said. She looked at me. She wrote 4 letters from the hospital, I said. I read the first 3 in the first weeks. I've been keeping the 4th. I looked at the stone. She said in the 4th one that she had asked someone she trusted to find me when the year was up. She said she was sorry for the year and not sorry for it at the same time, because she knew I needed it, and she knew me well enough to know that. I paused. She said the person she asked was someone she thought I'd like. She said, and this was her exact phrasing, she pays attention the way you pay attention, and you'll recognize it immediately, and I trust you both enough to leave it there. Nora was quiet for a long moment. She planned this, she said. She planned the important parts, I said. She left the rest. We stood at the grave with the rest between us. I want to tell you something directly, I said, because Claire valued directness and I've been trying to carry that forward, and because I don't think dancing around it is what either of us is built for. Nora looked at me. I'm not healed, I said. I want to be honest about that. I'm somewhere in the middle of a process I don't fully have language for yet. I'm carrying things that are still heavy and I'm working on learning the difference between keeping and carrying, which as it turns out is harder than it sounds. I held her gaze. I'm also the most present I've been in a year. The most willing to see what's in front of me instead of what's gone. And what's in front of me includes a woman who drove to a cemetery every Sunday for a month trying to time a promise correctly, and who picked chairs for 3 months for a studio that wanted to feel like it stays still, and who looks at things the way Claire said I look at things, and who is currently building something I think is going to matter to a lot of people who don't have language yet. Nora stood very still. I'm not asking for anything dramatic, I said. I'm asking if you want to come and look at the church in Fayetteville. Because she painted it, and I want to see it through the painting. I want to show you what it is, and what it was, and what it's trying to get back to. I paused. And after that, I'd like to keep showing you things. If that's something you want. The December air held still. Nora looked at Claire's grave, at the stone that said she looked at things carefully. Then she looked at me. You know she planned for this too, she said. Specifically, I know. Does that bother you? I thought about it seriously. About Claire in a hospital room making an inventory of our life and asking a woman she trusted to carry it forward. About a wooden art carrier in the back of a Subaru. About 12 watercolors in order, each one saying, look at this. It was here. It was real. It was worth seeing. No, I said. I've spent my career learning that the best buildings were made by people who thought about what they were leaving behind. What it would mean to someone who came later and needed it. I looked at the stone. She built something forward. That's not interference. That's love with structural integrity. Something shifted in Nora's expression. The thing underneath the careful, the thing she kept managed and steady. It opened just slightly, enough to see that it was there, and then stayed open instead of closing. The church, she said. Saturday, if the weather holds. The south transept light is extraordinary in December. She painted the south transept, Nora said. I know. I want to stand in it and see what she saw. Nora nodded slowly. Then she turned back to the grave and said, to the stone, not to me, clearly, and quietly, I found him. He's okay. A pause. We're working on the rest. The stone said what it always said. We walked back to the parking lot in the December cold, not rushing, the gravel doing what it always did. At the place where we would have split toward our separate cars, Nora stopped. She looked at me with the expression of a woman who has made a decision and arrived at it cleanly. The chairs, she said. I want to tell you what I chose, actually, since you asked about the studio. Tell me. Danish, mid-century. 1960s, original fabric gone, reupholstered in a deep green linen that I ordered 3 samples of before I committed. Low seat height because I find that people talk more honestly when they're not quite in a formal position. A little worn at the arms, which I kept rather than refinishing because, she paused. Because the wear is honest, I said. She looked at me. Because the wear is honest, she said. And because Claire sat in a chair like that in our sessions. She always ran her thumb along the arm when she was about to say something true. A pause. I wanted people to have that. The thing to do with their hands when the truth is coming. I stood in the cemetery parking lot in December and thought about Claire's thumb running along a chair arm in the moments before she told the truth, and about a woman who had paid close enough attention to that detail to build it into the next thing she made, and about all the ways that care moves forward through people when we let it. The bones are good, I said. Nora looked at me. Your practice, I said. The bones are good. Everything else is just time and the right load. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small thing I recognized, a miniature watercolor brush, the kind Claire had used in the sessions, and held it out flat on her palm. She asked me to give you this too, she said. She said to give it to you when I thought you were ready to stop documenting what was lost and start building what was next. She closed her fingers around it for a moment, then opened them again. I think you're ready. I took the brush from her palm. It was one of Claire's. I knew by the way it was worn at the ferrule, the specific pattern of use she had always had, the same way every time. I held it in my hand and looked at it for a long moment. Then I looked at Nora. Saturday, I said. Saturday, she said. She walked to her Subaru. I walked to my truck. The December morning was clear and cold and entirely present. Everything in it exactly what it was. A man standing in a parking lot with a paintbrush in his hand, and the specific unreasonable feeling of a person who has been standing in rubble for a year and has just recognized, in the specific language of someone who knows how to read a structure, that the foundation is still good. I looked at the brush. Then I looked at the grave in the distance, the flat granite stone with its single line. I thought about what Nora had said to it. I found him. He's okay. We're working on the rest. I thought about the inventory. All 12 paintings. The kitchen, the road, the church, the parking lot in South Carolina. The things Claire had looked at carefully and recorded so they wouldn't disappear. The version of me she had seen and handed to someone else to carry forward until I could carry it myself. I thought about the third category. Between what was there and what was lost. What can be built from what was learned? By the people who paid enough attention. I put the brush in my chest pocket. I drove toward the city in the December light, toward a studio with honest chairs and north light and work that mattered, toward a church in Fayetteville where the South transept waited to be seen through the eyes of a painting I now owned, toward the Saturday that was coming, and all the Saturdays that were the shape of it. Behind me in the cemetery, Claire's stone said what it always said. She looked at things carefully. She still was.